Welcome to the 4th episode of No Two Forks Given. In this episode, I'll be firing up the engine for the first time. First, I'll need to bolt on this racing exhaust system built exclusively for Vyrus by Aero. Because the rear shock is horizontally mounted, the exhaust can route through the swing arm where the shock normally sits. Rather than attaching each individual headers to the engine first, it was much easier to temporarily attach the 4 headers to the collector, including the springs, and then attach the whole assembly to the engine. The collector springs were removed so I can tweak the alignment with the end exhaust piece. And now for the 2 mufflers. With all the exhaust springs attached, I now secure the exhaust hanger. The exhaust hanger attaches to the lower engine mount. Now to connect the oxygen sensor. The radiators are also made specifically for Vyrus. As you can see here, it's a very tight space for the lower radiator between the front swing arm and the exhaust headers. The lower radiator is secured by 2 nuts. Off camera, I do mark all the nuts and bolts once I final torque them. And here's the upper radiator. The earlier Vyrus 986s ran a smaller upper radiator. You'll know you have a later Gen 96 like this one because the fairings are a little wider. Unlike the donor CBR 600, the 986s do not use an electric fan as far as I know. There just isn't much space for one. As you can see, these radiators are built with a mesh guard. I find these help minimize the fins being bent, especially with racing slick tires throwing off bits of rubber. The front shock is buried behind the radiator. To adjust it, you have to squeeze your hand right above where the blue tape is. Obviously, don't do this when the bike is hot. This isn't really a huge problem, and I'll explain this in a future episode. Vyrus provided me all the ear hose clamps for the radiators, but here I'm using worm gears just to make it easier to take apart in the future. This is the radiator overflow bottle. The front brake lines are routed and attached under the front swing arm. The black pieces you see here are the swing arm protectors. They are 3D printed and are pretty thick. Hopefully I'll never have to use them. And now to assemble the gas tank. The gas tank is a beautifully welded, lovely piece of kit. The carbon fiber seat slides tightly over it. The carbon fiber seat and the gas tank are secured by two small bolts. This is one of the few areas where I can't fit a torque wrench and require a short stubby hex wrench. Need to go by feel to achieve the right amount of torque. Now to attach the gas tank seat assembly onto the bike. Here I attached a fuel hose and power to the fuel pump and level sensor. Now to bolt on the steering headstock frame. In the last episode, I bolted on the air box. Turns out I actually need to remove this in order to fit this steering headstock frame. Unfortunately, I don't have a YouTube video I can watch of someone assembling this bike beforehand. I was told by the US distributor, Bimota Spirit, to not forget to attach the throttle and clutch cables as soon as I can. Once all the other parts are in place, like the airbox and fairings, it is impossible to attach these cables. steering headstock frame attaches to the seat with this piece. Since this hub-center steering bike does not transmit the entire braking force through the headstock, the bolts are rather small and the whole upper assembly is rather light. The two bolts you see here with the white washers are for the fairings. To keep track of the loose nuts and bolts, I usually put them back onto the threads to not lose them and to also know which nut and bolt goes where. And now to torque everything down. Here I attach the steering linkages to the wheel. The steering linkages have some very tight tolerances, so there's no slop in the steering at all. Like a clutch lever bolt, these steering bolts protrude beyond the threaded part, so you can attach a nut to it as well. This adds additional redundancy for obvious reasons. I am now attaching the fuel catch can. Now to attach the handlebars. For the Vyrus 96, this is normally done after you attach the fairings. I'm skipping that step for now, so I can observe the engine and radiator for leaks during the first test fire. The bike came with quick disconnects for the brake lines that don't leak or introduce air to the system. This makes it easier to swap out the master cylinder or calipers. Pretty much everything else here assembles just like a regular motorcycle. This is how I routed the throttle cables. Note the brake line is now zip tied to the steering headstock frame as well. Always good to check the throttle snaps back as it's being worked on. Time to top off some fluids before firing up the engine. Have it. Engine fired right up, no leaks, clicks through all 6 gears, leaves slipper clutches working just beautifully. And that racing exhaust has a beautiful sound to it. In the next episode, I'll be spending more time with the finely made carbon fiber components. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.